Okay, so this is just going to be a quick video about the toggle carbine, my most recent gun, explaining how it works, taking it apart, and telling you a little bit how I made it. So for starters, we'll just start with the magazine, get that out of here. This is not a homemade magazine. I bought this magazine. This is from an Uzi. It's a 45 ACP Uzi magazine, 22 rounds. I did attempt to make a drum magazine, or it's really a rotary magazine. This didn't work, and so I had to switch to a factory magazine in order to get some kind of reliable operation, and so that's where this came in. And it's worked just fine, and 22 rounds is the same that I was going to put in that rotary magazine, so no real loss there. It just doesn't look as cool, I guess. The magwell that the magazine fits into is actually just 3D printed and then just painted to match kind of the rest of the gun, but this is just 3D printed plastic. You can kind of see it on the inside with a push button mag release, which comes through onto the other side right there. Pretty simple stuff there. The gun, well, let's look on the top. There's your toggle. Typical of a toggle. I'm probably going to say toggle locked a lot, just because that's kind of the words most people use, but to be clear, this is not a toggle locked gun. This is not locked breech. This is delayed blowback. So this is really a toggle delayed blowback gun. Toggle locked is maybe a little bit excessive for a 45 ACP, so toggle delayed was the simplest thing, and that's what I went with. So I think I'll take it apart a little bit more. This gun was kind of designed to be easy to disassemble. Unlike all of my other guns, if you've seen any other videos, they're very difficult to disassemble. So I'll show you how easy this goes. This screw right here, a couple turns, fore end comes off. Flip the gun around. We have this takedown lever right here. Rotate that 90 degrees, lower receiver comes right off. This nut on the back is pretty tight, but if you can get it, okay, I had to get a wrench just to kind of break it loose, but get that, stock comes off. And now you have the barreled action here. So move these out of the way. I will come back to the lower receiver. For now, we'll just look at the upper receiver in barreled action. These here are the recoil springs. 2 nested springs in there. When the bolt is closed, like this, these springs are barely compressed. The inner spring is not compressed at all. The outer spring is just a little bit. So there's very, very little force acting on here when the bolt is closed, but because of the mechanical advantage afforded by a toggle, there's a ton of force acting on the bolt forward, even though there's just a couple pounds here on this spring. What's happening is these springs are pushing forward on in there this arm, trying to rotate it down, so it pulls down on this pin, which has a little linkage that connects it to the rear toggle, so that as I pull this, it draws that up, right? Compressing the spring. And that pulls back the bolt. Not a whole lot to it. One of the important parameters to tune on this gun is how closed does this go, because that sets how easy it is to pop it open from the perspective of the cartridge. So to do that, you see that little set screw right there on the bottom of the handle, and that set screw, you can see the mark where it has impacted the receiver. That sets how far down this can go, which in turn is how straight the toggle can get. The straighter the toggle gets, the more difficult it would be for the cartridge to cycle the action. In here is a little piece of rubber, and that's the buffer that when this slaps open really quick, it hits that piece of rubber, and there's a little bit of squish in the rubber, and that buffer, prevents the gun from kind of beating itself to death. The bolt is pretty simple. You can see the bolt face in there, firing pin. There's the extractor on top. Spring-loaded extractor. Nothing too complicated there. On the bottom of the bolt, that screw right there retains the firing pin, which is right there. Got an internal firing pin spring, and this groove here is for the ejector, which is on the lower receiver. This pin, this long pin that protrudes from the back and goes with the bolt, that is just an extension that is used to trip the disconnector to function as an out-of-battery safety. Originally, the gun did not have an out-of-battery safety, and then I had an out-of-battery detonation. So I went ahead and added that to trip the disconnector for a little bit longer, because otherwise the bolt could go like here, and the disconnector was already released, and the gun could be fired. So by adding that pin, the bolt has to go almost the whole way closed before it allows you to fire the gun. The barrel is nothing too special. It's button rifled, and I guess I could talk about the muzzle brake. The muzzle brake here is actually aluminum. It's kind of modeled after the muzzle brake that you could find on some of the old Thompsons. Obviously, the whole gun is modeled after a Thompson, but this is aluminum. Everything in here is all steel. The barrel is steel. We have the sights, I should point out too. We have a aperture rear sight and just a simple post on the front. And everything is parkerized as well if you're interested in the finish. That's what that is. So, moving on to the lower receiver now. As I mentioned before, the magwell is 3D printed. The lower receiver itself is aluminum that's been painted with a kind of a satin matte black finish, which kind of is the closest thing I can get to match the parkerizing. It's a little bit tricky when you have shiny aluminum and then dull parkerizing and you want to make the gun look normal. So kind of a satin black was the best I could get there. The aluminum lower receiver is mostly just a shell. It doesn't really have anything substantial feature-wise. It's mostly just hollowed out, and then there's this frame that is inserted into the aluminum lower receiver and held in place by these two screws, and that is the trigger group, basically. This right here is the hammer, right there. That little tube you see sticking out the back, that is the mainspring housing. It's threaded, so you can thread it in and out to adjust the strength of the spring to whatever you need. The sear is right in there, so if I hold this back and pull the trigger, you can see I'm hitting the disc. There you go. There's the sear acting. It was slipping off because I was bumping the disconnector. So there's the hammer. Okay, the disconnector is right here. So if I hold that down, I can pull the trigger and nothing happens. And you cannot, this is a bit of a design flaw. You cannot pull the trigger while this is disassembled like this, because the hammer, there's nothing to stop the hammer. It'll just fly all the way forward and then the springs will come flying out. It needs the bolt here to limit how far the hammer can move. So you cannot fire it in this configuration. It's not good. This is the ejector right here. This fits up into that groove in the bottom of the bolt that you saw, and when the bolt comes back, this hits the bottom of the cartridge and flips it out. Pretty typical there. The takedown lever right here is just a kind of a half moon shape, like a semicircle. So when it's down like this in the takedown position, the flat allows you to slide the upper receiver on, which, by the way, it interacts via these rails here and here, which are milled into the lower receiver as well. And then there's a that semicircular hole in the receiver, when you rotate this, that face there rotates up into position and locks the pieces together. These same rails are also how the stock is attached. Stock fits on and then the screw just retains it. I suppose I could remove the frame from the lower receiver so you can see what that looks like. That does require tools. I suppose this is just threaded, so you just turn it a couple turns and it comes right out. You do have to remove that to remove the lower frame. Okay, there we go. So here is the frame, the trigger group. Most of the features are on this side. So this here is your disconnector. This is, for lack of a better word, a transfer bar. And then here's your trigger. So you see there's that surface there that the pin on the trigger presses up against. This pin here goes through and is attached to the sear in there. So when you push on this, it pushes up on that pin, which releases the sear. So let me hold back the hammer right there. So that's lifting the sear. If you push the disconnector, it pivots that out of the way, and now, so the disconnector gets hit. Now the trigger won't do anything. When the trigger is pulled, like after you fired, and the disconnector is tripped, the disconnector can release. Nothing happens until you let go of the trigger, and it clicks back into position, and now you can fire again. Main spring is inside of here. Hammer. That's mostly all there is to that. I suppose to say the ejector is riveted in place with little aluminum rivets. Alright, I guess I'll put it all back together. Okay, as you can see, it's not unlike all my other guns that take 5-10 minutes to disassemble. This is a pretty quick assembly disassembly for one of my guns. The addition of a takedown lever was a really good idea. That helped me a lot. I'm glad I added that, because when I'm working on this gun, you got to take it apart and put it back together 100 different times while you're building it. So having that was a huge time saver for me. This gun didn't take nearly as long as any other gun that I've made, which is nice because it's not the simplest gun I've ever made by any means. The rolling block was the simplest thing, and I did this faster even than the rolling block. So I'm very happy with how this turned out. I'm very happy with how easy it was to make, actually, strangely enough. And yeah, that's the toggle carbine.